Welcome. Hi, I'm Michael Forrester, and I am a technical consultant and cloud stream lead with WebAge Solutions. I also happen to work on the AWS exam for AWS, particularly for Solutions Architect Associate. So I'm actually one of two people responsible for all of the exam questions on the exam. And while you're not going to get any secrets today, I do know a little bit about the exam, simply because I'm the one who approves and validates and does all the technical evaluation of all the questions that go from on the exam, both from the last version, the version 2 that just got retired, and version 3, which just got released within the last couple months. So I'd like to think you're in good hands, but we're going to teach you how to navigate the perils of the certification. And then we're going to spend a lot of time practicing for those who want to practice. But first, what we usually do is we're going to cover some logistics and talk about, how to, what is the exam about? What's on it? How do we figure that out? And then we're going to talk about 4 really easy steps that I follow to, I think to date, the pass rate is 81%. Well, and so that's not a guarantee. Obviously, it's different for different people, but the pass rate is pretty high. And it's something that AWS themselves has come back to WebAge and said, how did you achieve such a high pass rate? So these steps are pretty, we've been using them for years. We've modified them over the years, but there's also the final step, which will actually allow you to know whether or not you're ready to schedule the exam. So by the time you leave today, right off the top of your head, you're going to know exactly what 4 things to do to get ready for your certification. And one thing I want to point out is that it's not just to prepare for the certification itself, but also to really feel like you have the skills to back it up. So let me share my screen and let's talk a little bit about the certification. No, not you. How about you? There we go. Okay, so first we're just going to dive into the AWS website for just a minute, because this is where you're going to end up doing most of the logistical tasks, and we just want to make sure that you're familiar with those pieces. Short and simple, not going to spend a lot of time here, but definitely going to be useful. So I'm assuming everyone can see my screen and it says AWS certification at present.
Yep.
Can see it.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. So easy thing to know is that all I did was type in AWS certification in Google, I got here, right? And oddly enough, it wasn't the first link because, search being what it is, someone paid, got it first. As you scroll down, though, what we get to is we get to the base layout of certifications. They used to have this great kind of inverted funnel here that shows you that the professional certifications, which is the green hexagons there, then the blue certifications, the associates, and the cloud practitioner had a relationship with each other. They showed that, the cloud practitioner one, the black hexagon, was foundational. The associate ones are obviously intermediate, and the professional ones were, considered to be obviously higher level. And the purple ones, the purple specialty certifications, those were off to the side to show that they didn't really have a relationship with those kind of beginner, intermediate, and advanced certifications. Now, we're here today to talk mainly about Solutions Architect Associate, right? From my understanding, because most of you took architecting on AWS, which is the class associated with that, correct? Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. So just know that that's where we're going to spend most of our focus. Be aware, though, that these certifications last for 3 years. And if you get Cloud Practitioner now before you take the Solutions Architect Associate, they will refresh and recertify you any lower level certifications you have. And to kind of draw that out so it makes a little bit more sense, is that if you start with Cloud Practitioner and you get that, let's say you get that in December, and then in January you get Solutions Architect Associate, that automatically refreshes the certification. And any of these certifications will refresh that certification. In addition, let's say later on after this, you're so inspired because I'm so compelling and you feel so empowered by our talk today that you decide, you know what, I'm going to go for the pro certification afterwards. Obviously, the Solutions Architect Professional is going to refresh the associates beneath it, which will in turn refresh that one. And the DevOps Engineering one actually does these two. So just know that there's a relationship between these particular certifications where the pros sit at the top, the associates sit in the middle, and the foundational sits at the bottom. And if you refresh any one above it and you already have the certification beneath it, it'll automatically refresh and extend the expiration date of your certification. So most people, when they're going for the higher level certifications, they're not super attached to that, but it is kind of nice to know that you do get to recertify and everything just by going for one level up. Now, the certifications over on the right, the specialty certifications, those are typically narrower but deeper dives into different areas such as security, machine learning, etc. I will tell you that if you ever decide to go after these, the security certification is pretty broad and the advanced networking is really deep. And so, you've been warned. If we ever get to that, email me, let's talk, because while it's the same 4-step process that I'm going to talk today about how to prepare for this, it's a little deeper when it comes to the specialty exams. And so, make sure you get the right guides for that. Okay. So any questions about the relationship of these exams to each other and our focus on Solutions Architect Associate? Any questions that I did not answer related to logistics or certification or expiration?
I guess I have a quick one. Like, can you start with the associate level and get the lower one, or how does that work?
You can jump to any certification you want at any point with no prerequisites. So if you've been doing security for 3 to 5 years on AWS and you don't want to get the Solutions Architect Associate or DevOps Professional, you could go straight to Security Specialty. You do not need to have any prerequisites to go to any certification, and it will also not prevent you from getting any of the lower level certifications at any point in time that you choose.
So if you get the Solution Architects Associate, do you automatically get the Cloud Practitioner as well, or do you still have to take the Cloud Practitioner?
Only you have to take it. So if you've taken it before, then it will refresh it. If you haven't taken it and you take the Solutions Architect Associate, it won't give it to you. You have to actually take the exam in order to earn the certification.
Is there any reason you would want to take the lower level certification if you've already achieved the Solutions Architecture Associate?
I would say that it builds confidence to take the lower level certification before you go to the next one. Plus, they're going to test you on all the lower level certification knowledge. So by taking Solutions Architect Associates, they're going to test you on everything that's in Cloud Practitioner anyway. So sometimes by taking the Cloud Practitioner first, it builds your confidence. You get familiar with the exams, and then you feel more confident walking into SAA Associates exam. But other than that, yeah, there's no compelling reason to do that. The only other thing I've seen is that some consulting companies, which obviously Progressive is not, value the number of certifications that someone has. And so that's another reason someone will go back and grab the lower level certifications. The only other question I frequently am asked at this point is that, are there continuing education units for like these certifications? The answer is no. They last for 3 years. And in order for you to refresh the certification, you have to take the certification again. But between day 0 of year 1 and, the last day of year 3, they're not going to ask you to do anything to stay fresh or consistent. So I'll talk about that a little bit as kind of like my last kind of like hidden step for studying. But generally, there's no requirements from AWS to maintain your certification. Okay, so let's dive in. Ask me questions at any time, by the way. So I am going to take a moment, by the way, to show scheduling an exam. It'll only take a few minutes just to show so you can see the process and be comfortable. But mainly what we're here for is the very first step that you're going to take, the very first one you're going to follow is you're going to go deep dive into your exam just to make sure you know what you're getting into. For example, this is a 130-minute exam that's got 65 questions. So obviously, if you do the math, that leaves you about 2 minutes to answer each question. So, something to be aware of. The main reason we're here, though, is not just for that little piece of detail, is that step 1 is actually to get the exam guide. So for any of the certifications that you decide to take, step 1 is to get the official AWS exam guide and take a look at it. So we're actually going to click on this exam guide because there's this important pieces of information here that are really worth on every single exam looking at. But we're obviously focused on SAA, the Solutions Architect Associate exam. This is version C03. Just take a note of it. It doesn't change that often. But if you go to register for your exam and it says C02, or you're looking at a study guide and it says C02, that's not the latest version, which is the other reason that we grab the official exam guide off the website. So you know exactly what version you should be looking at. And if any related material should say SAA C03. If it says SAA C02, it's not going to be relevant for this exam. Doesn't mean it can't be useful. They pretty much C02 and C03 teach about 80% of the same material, but when it comes to exam guides, make sure you just grab the latest one off the website. Now, here's some interesting things that this is why I want you to grab the exam guide. This is true again for all the certifications. One, they want you to have at least 1 year of hands-on experiencing design cloud solutions using AWS services. Is that a requirement? No, but that's what they're targeting. So they're really looking for someone who's got that year of doing basically production design, production architecture with AWS services. The other things we just kind of skimmed on already, right, is that there's 65 questions. There's 2 different types of questions, which means there's either a multiple choice or there's a multiple 1 or 2 or 3 responses, typically. Now, and then they add in some content that frankly is not going to change your experience of taking the exam. They tell you that 50 questions are going to affect your score, and there's 15 questions that don't. But it doesn't matter. You're not going to be able to tell the difference between the questions that are unscored and the questions that are scored. So you're going to treat them all the same. You've got 2 minutes per question. You won't be able to tell. I tell you just a short, funny story is that I took the machine learning exam for the second time at the beginning of this year. And I got questions on services that I'd never heard of before. Now, I have to tell you that that's really unusual because while I don't know everything about AWS, I at least know the names of like 99% of the services, and you know, out of all 400 and whatever we got now, right? So I got questions, like 7 questions in a row, and I thought, man, for the first time ever, when I hit submit at the end of that, I think I really failed this exam. Turns out I scored higher on the machine learning exam than other exams that I'm considered to be a specialist, like a pro, you know, like more of a specialist in. And it was because of those unscored questions, because they asked me a bunch of questions about services, and I was just like, this is weird. I don't even know what that service is. And I looked them up, by the way, and the services were either in preview or, had just been announced. So just know that it doesn't matter that what percentage of the scores are unscored or not. AWS is testing questions. The only thing you need to really hold on to is that there's 65 questions and that you're going to treat them all very seriously. Sometimes the exams go to 70 and 75 questions, but that's it. And the other thing that's really important, other than just the total number of questions and therefore how much time do you have per question, is your scoring. So the minimum passing score is 720. So just know that out of 1,000, you know, if this was 100 percentile, you're looking for a 72. So that's it. Now, your exam is scored against other people who are taking the exam. So the minimum passing score is 720. Sometimes that score rises slightly, but if you shoot for a 720, typically you're going to pass. But we're actually training you in our 4-step process for a 900 for a 90. So, you know, I wouldn't worry about like skirting the line there. I don't think I've ever scored in the 700s, even with the somewhat cavalier way in which I study, because I consider myself familiar with the services. Oddly enough, fresher students tend to take the studying more seriously than the more experienced students, because there's a certain measure of arrogance that comes with thinking that you know how something functions. That being said, 65 questions, 720 is your passing score. The other thing that's really important in the exam guide for all the certifications is the number of questions that you're going to get covering a certain topic. Oddly enough, with C03, most of your design questions are going to be about how to design secure architectures. Second's going to be resiliency. Third's going to be high performance. And then there's going to be cost optimized. If you're familiar with the pillars of the well-architected framework, you'll notice that operational excellence isn't here. Neither is sustainability, right? And security, resiliency, high performance, cost optimization, operational excellence, and sustainability. So what you're left with is these core 4 tenets of the well-architected framework. So knowing how to use AWS services for security, but also enhance security in services that are not security focused, how to design fault tolerance and HA and resiliency and recoverability in our architectures, how to, obviously, devise for scale and throughput inside of architectures, and then how to optimize costs based on different licensing models, but also serverless versus not using serverless versus, SaaS services versus PaaS and IaaS. Those are the concepts they're going to test you on. Now, I just pulled all that out of memory. There's actually a section here, and this is part of step 1, is that when you download the exam guide, you're going to go through and learn some of this material. But the other thing you're going to do with this exam guide is you're going to read through this entire section of domain 1, 2, 3, and 4. And as you read through these sections, if you don't know what some of these acronyms or concepts are, you're going to write that down. You're going to capture it in some form or fashion. I don't care if you highlight the PDF document or put it into whatever your favorite note capture is, but you want to capture this material, because if you don't know what single sign-on is, or you don't know what the secure token service is, for example, STS, which is one of the oldest services in AWS, then you want to at least know what that service does. This is at the associates level. This is not cloud practitioner where you're just recalling services, and it's also not the professional or specialty level. So don't drive yourself into overtraining by trying to master each service. Remember, the target candidate here has 1 year working with AWS services and designing for those services in a production capacity. So knowing all the API calls and the ins and outs of how a service integrates with other services, that's awesome. And if you got time to do that, great. But I just want to point out that you're probably going to see about 40, maybe 50 services here. It might be overkill to try and really master them. Save that for your career, not for the certification prep. Okay. So step one, get the exam guide, read the exam guide, and in the domain section in particular, make sure you know what an AWS service endpoint is, what all these words are. Do you know what Macy is? Do you know what guard duty is? What is Cognito? What do we use it for? Right? You're going to read through these sections and just make sure that you know what every single service listed here is. And that's step one, is just read the guide, read the domains, understand how the exam functions, and that's really it. Any questions about that step thus far? Okay. Just taking a look. Sometimes at the end of these, by the way, is a list of services that are on the exam and a list of services that are off the exam. So I'm just kind of scrolling by. I will tell you, please avoid the appendix if you can. Just avoid it, because this is not meant to be an exhaustive list of everything that could be on the exam. So therefore, it's kind of useless unless you just want to validate whether a particular service is in scope. But they can throw any service they want in scope for SAA. So there's very few exceptions to that. Now, I say that sometimes at the end of these is a list of services that are definitely not going to be on here, right? Now, the list of services, for example, that are not going to be on here are going to be things that are developer focused, machine learning focused, sysop focused, or they're so fringe, like they're not related to core application hosting on AWS. But you don't need to memorize this because, again, it's not going to be useful. But like, for example, the entire machine learning portfolio with a few notable exceptions is off of this. Like, for example, Poly's not on here, so Poly's in scope, right? Recognition's not on here, so recognitions is in scope. So there's things like that. All the immediate translation services, all the migration stuff, like that's on here. And obviously things like quantum computing, RoboMaker, and satellite management are not going to be on the SAA exam. So again, I wouldn't necessarily read the appendix. It's probably just going to overload your brain, which is probably going to get overloaded at some point anyway. But if you're like, hey, I wonder if they're going to ask us any questions about quantum computing, you can go take a look and see if it's listed there. Okay. Good. All right. So step one, get the exam guide, read through the sections, but particularly the domain section, read through all of that, make sure you know what every service there does. If you don't, in the domain section in particular, not the appendix, then you want to go back and note it and make sure you know what those services actually do. That's step one. Now, step two is that once you've gotten the exam guide and you've kind of, read through this whole thing, step two is that you would then start kind of your study. But in order to study properly, you're going to need a little bit more than just the exam guide to get an idea of like what to study, right? So what we usually do at this point, and I'm actually going to post this exam guide in chat so you can just have it if you haven't already looked it up, is that you're going to go to any browser and you're going to take them on AWS ramp-up guides. Now, I would bookmark this because this could be a very useful website that I'm about to lead you to. But this is a guide that a bunch of training partners like myself and AWS collaborated on to basically build these ramp up guides that allow you to learn how to prepare for both a role, but also for technologies inside of AWS. These are not like 100% exhaustive of all the resources that you would want, for example, around containers or Cloud Essentials, which is also Cloud Practitioner, or databases, but they're pretty close. So since we're doing architecture, we're going to scroll back up to the role-based section. I'm going to post this in the chat so you can have it. And we're going to take a look at the Solutions Architect PDF guide here. Now, once again, it's going to leap us into a PDF, but here's the difference. This is step 2. So if step 1 is to get the exam guide and read through the domain section, make sure you know what you don't know. Step 2 is to get the ramp-up guide. And you get the ramp-up guide for either your role or technology, and you're going to train yourself by following this step-by-step guide of what to look at. Now, just to ask, are you going to memorize every single little bit of detail in each of these trainings and white papers and whatnot? Is that what I'm asking of you? Yes or no?
No.
No. If you were a security specialist reading a security paper and taking the security exam, you better memorize that white paper, because that research paper is going to be your lifeblood. But we're at the associates level. We're not doing the pro level. We're not doing the specialty level. So what I really want you to do is I want you to learn the basic concepts. Do you know the 3 primary principles in IAM? Do you know how to federate IAM with Active Directory? I'm not asking you to design a full end-to-end solution with all the details. Do you know that IAM can do that and how it federates with an or any IDP really, or any Active Directory? Like, do you know that? Like, those are the core concepts that you're going to be learning in these things. So this is your step-by-step guide. This is step 2, your step-by-step guide for at least skimming, if not memorizing the broad concepts. And you could go for detail if you're like, well, I'm going to go for professional right after this, so I'm just going to squeeze all the knowledge out of this. You could do that. But notice that this covers different sections of like identity and security, compute and storage, networking, and there's still a decent amount here. You're going to spend about 40 additional hours over and above the class preparing for the certification. Why is that? Well, AWS doesn't say this enough, is that the class doesn't cover all the material the certification covers. Honestly, it can't. It would need to be a 3-week class, to be frank. So all of this is going to fill in all the gaps and reinforce the stuff that you learned in architecting on AWS. So that's what it's here for. Now, most of this is either self-paced labs or digital trainings. By the way, the digital trainings all take place on Skill Builder, which I'm already signed into. But when you enroll in these classes, they're actually pretty. I said I'm signed into. Apparently, I'm not signed into it. Here, let's try that again. Let's not do that one. So once you enroll and get signed in, what will happen is that it will allow you to see the like basics of the course. That's a lot of buttons just to get to the beginning. And when you start course, what will happen is on the left-hand side, it's going to give you the entire layout of the course that you're looking at. And as you scroll through the course, notice on the left-hand side, the progress bar that's happening as I scroll through the course. As you scroll through this course, go through the course introduction, it's going to track your progress. And if there's any quizzes or whatnot, which by the way, those quizzes are not going to be required for you to pass for you to go forward. They're just giving you reinforcement. This is going to allow you to slowly step forward through each of these modules, but most of the classes are like this. The self-paced labs, which I believe we clicked out of. So let's get back in there. The self-paced labs that are listed here are typically going to be hosted also on Skill Builder. I will forewarn you that some of these are free. Some of these are not free now. It'll cost you $30 to run all of the labs that you could ever want within a month, but it will require you to do a subscription. Just to say this, you could skip those labs. You don't have to. It is not a requirement that you do labs, particularly for SAA. I mean, we prefer hands-on architects, obviously, but it's not required for you to pass this particular certification. So if you do run into that and you're like, I don't really want to do the $30 or whatever, just let it go. It's totally fine. Now, that being said, coming back to the PDF. see digital training, self-paced labs, digital training, self-paced labs. There used to be a few white papers in here, like research papers, but I don't see them in here now. I guess they've slimmed it out, which is good. And then notice that as you get down towards the bottom, let's see, where is it? There's an exam prep course that you can take that'll actually kind of walk you through the different pieces that I'm kind of walking through, so that consider that optional. And then notice that there's the class here, and that at any point in time after this, you could basically take the Solutions Architect class. At this point, you could actually take the actual associate's exam. For some reason I think there's somewhere an error, because they have the professional one listed here. Like, hey, here's the exam prep, you could take the prep, but they don't really list like when you would actually take the exam. If the exam prep is listed for associates, which it is right here, that means you're ready to take the exam. So you just want to sign up for it at that point, according to them. I'm going to give you a different kind of standard that I want you to follow to know whether or not you're ready to sign up for associates. But just so you know, you don't need to go back and do all the advanced curriculum that's listed here in order to prepare for the associate's exam. The rest of this is for the professional exam. Okay, make sure we're clear. This architecture exam ramp up guide is actually for both associates and professional. You're going to stop at the associate, since that's what we're focused on. Questions about this?
So this is Jiten. Quick question: when it says exam prep, so if we click that, so is it giving us like a sample exam that we can just go through, or?
Actually, no, it's kind of giving you a little bit of a like broader rehash than what we're covering, right? So I'm giving you steps that we've used to teach people around certification. This one's going to basically walk you through the exam guide, talk about all like the components that are on the exam, but it's going to take 3 hours to do it. So quite frankly, it's pretty long. This is why I recommend you skip it. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you're looking for practice exam questions, if you go back to AWS certification, just go back to the base site and then click into the certification and training website.
Okay.
Sorry. That's going to ask me to log in. Hold on one second. If you come here, like where we were before, and you scroll down to the exam. So when we came in here and we clicked on the Solutions Architect Associate so we could get the details of the exam and get down to the exam guide, some of you may have noticed that there were some sample questions down here for the exam. And then there was the exam guide right above it, which is step 1, right? Was the exam guide. Step 2 was the ramp up guides. I got to tell you, the sample questions and the practice questions that AWS currently offers, of which I am actively working with that team to improve, currently are horrible. So I wouldn't even bother looking at the sample questions, and I wouldn't even bother looking at the practice exam questions unless you have no other resource. But step 4, I'm going to give you a resource for recommended practice exams that's going to blow anything else that you get from AWS out of the water. AWS themselves have said, those questions are awesome. I wish our exams were that way, or our practice questions were that way. So hold off on that, Jitender, because I'm going to give you, on step 4, I'm going to give you some practice questions that you can purchase for about $15. They're going to last you for 3 years, and they're going to be the best exam questions we found in the industry. And I mean that not as an exam dump, but just in terms of preparing you for the exam.
Thank you.
Yeah. So step 1, get the exam guide. Step 2, get the ramp up guide. Follow the ramp up guide, right? The other thing you can do is that it's highly recommended that this ramp up guide that we're looking at for Solutions Architect is going to teach you everything about how the system was designed and how AWS wants you to think about these services. But some of you are hands-on people, and I'm not judging you one way or another, but some of you really can't drive it into your brains unless you get your hands on it, at least virtually in some form or fashion. So just know that your opportunity for doing that is that you can actually create a free account on AWS, and AWS has these workshops, not a wok, although that is one of my favorite cooking implements, but regardless, not a wok, but it's a workshops.aws URL, which I'm going to post in the chat. This is really the third step. If you create your own personal AWS account, most of these labs are going to cost you somewhere between 10 cents and 50 cents as long as you don't leave anything running. Don't be in the middle of a lab and get called away and leave it sitting there for 24, 48, 3 days. And then you're like, oh my God, I spent $3. How did that happen? And just so you know, that's probably about as bad as it's going to be unless you decide to start up something massive. But bottom line is that this is a list of free workshops. So if you're in the exam guide, and let's say someone says, well, have you heard of CloudWatch events? And you're like, Michael, I've never even touched CloudWatch events. I don't even know what that is, right? You could say, well, you know what? Maybe there's something here that we could find. Now, in this particular case, I searched for CloudWatch events and it didn't do anything. But let's just search for CloudWatch because maybe it's not tagged properly. Because sometimes that happens. All right, so here's the CloudWatch and Systems Manager workshop, free. It's gonna take you 4 hours to do it. It's at level 200. I bet you if I click in here, by the way, there's gonna be something about CloudWatch events. Metrics, logs, alarms, dashboards. Oh, there wasn't, but maybe in one of the other workshops there is, right? CloudTrail monitoring with CloudWatch, CloudWatch metrics. You know what? Maybe they're using the new name. Maybe they're using the one called EventBridge. Maybe not. Okay, fair enough. So if let's say there isn't a workshop there, there's one other place that I recommend that you look, and it's called the Well Architected Labs, which I'm going to post in the chat. This URL is the second one that we recommend for step 3. And this one contains labs that are actually more specific for architecture. So if you don't find what you're looking at workshops at AWS, step 3 is to look at the wellarchitectedlabs.com. And let's say, what do we use EventBridge for mainly? We usually, I guess we use it a lot for security. So let's go take a look around. Detective controls, VPC, user cleanup. Anyway, bottom line, because I could just get lost in this rabbit hole, is that anything that you're looking for as far as like labs for a particular service that you're really not familiar with, here's how you would do it, is that you would look for the lab here, right? And that's how you would find it. So just know that this is a way for you to get free hands-on experience in your own AWS account with no restrictions by, Progressive or anybody else, because you're going to be managing your own account. Now, is this going to be the way it works at Progressive? No, but most of the exam isn't, actually, just so you know. But at least you'll know how it works just on, in general public sector before it's locked down by security and operations. Okay. So these are the two places where if step 1 is to get the exam guide, understand how the exam works. Step 2 is to get expertise by getting access to all of this training about how the system was designed. Step 3 is to use workshops at AWS and wellarchitectedlabs.com to get hands-on experience so you can actually get experience with how the system works. There's some really cool labs here, by the way. So, I mean, you can go deep, deep, deep down this rabbit hole and really play with these services, learn the menus, see how they function. It really can give you the experience that you're looking for. Some of these 300 level labs, by the way, using cross-account Lambda or instance response with a CLI, multi-layered API security with Cognito and using a web application firewall. That's gold right there. Okay. So questions about step 3 about how to get hands-on experience when you don't have a project working on AWS. So Troy, that's a good question. Ideally, I would look at 100 and 200 level labs, but I got to tell you, if you come out here and look and you're really interested in something, like what are VPC flow logs, for example? I would say go for it. Stick with 100s and 200s unless you see something that just really captures your interest, and then go explore it because it'll be worth doing.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah. I would say you don't really need all of the 200s and 300s until you get to the pro level. But I've come out here looking for a 100 level lab and found something. Like I was out here the other day and there was like a whole blueprint about how to use event-driven scaling with Lambda to manage. And I was like, I forget what I'm doing. I'm going to go do this. And it actually answered my question. Tim, you had a question?
Yeah. So with step 2 being looking at that ramp up guide and going through there, understanding the various things about it, would you recommend, if there's something that we didn't quite digest there, going ahead and finding the associated workshop and doing it at that time and kind of bouncing back and forth?
Yeah, I would say if you're like, I'm not really grokking that concept and I don't want to go take the course again because the way it was presented didn't really sit with me. Yeah, go dive in.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be linear. You know, you don't have to like finish step 2 and then go to step 3. You can bounce back and forth. People do that all the time. Strike while the iron is hot, right? Yeah.
I mean, that's what I figured. I just wanted to make sure that was in you know, the best interest, because I tend to be one of those who doesn't really grasp it until I somehow get into the super details of it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, you know, I agree with you is that most of us, you know, think of ourselves as visual learners, and that whole thing around the senses has been dispelled quite a bit through studies. The truth of the matter is that we're all actually multi-sense learners, right? And so you're right. Getting hands-on, playing with it. Like if you get into an argument with somebody about S3, you'll never forget what you were talking about with S3, right? You go out there and do a lab, and in the middle of the lab, forget to put a comma somewhere, and you bang your head against that problem until you figure out the comma's missing, and it's about CloudWatch alarms. You'll never forget that about CloudWatch alarms, right? So yeah, so most of us are like that. So getting hands-on is usually useful, particularly for topics either that you're weak at, that you didn't really get, or something you just want to know more about and you want to remember it. There was a third website that I'm just going to proffer out here. This one's not free. So just before I say that, though, it sounded like there was going to be a question. No? Okay. So this is a hidden little gem that's only going to be up for a little bit longer. So Quick Labs used to be the official lab provider for AWS until Google bought them in 2016, which is kind of a hilarious story because Quick Labs had no Google Labs when Google bought them in 2016. It's almost like they just decided they were just going to take Amazon's candy, which is kind of a funny statement. Anyway, moving on. So anyway, here it is 6 years later, and finally AWS has migrated off of Quick Labs, right? But Quick Labs still has this hidden website called amazon.quicklabs.com. It's not publicly available. And if you sign in, you like just create a free account. And actually, I'll do it right now just so you can see it. Do I still have, let's see. Oh yeah, use Google for this. And you might say, well, Michael, why is this relevant for step 3? Didn't you just talk about 2 places that we can go and do free labs inside of our Amazon account? Yes, I did. But if you log into amazon.quicklabs.com, and let's say you want to come out here and do a lab on S3, this will actually allow you to do labs. But notice how it says 8 credits and 15 credits. By the way, the credit's about $1. Just know that there's there's about 14 labs out here that are free, that are not going to run in your AWS account. They're going to run in Quick Labs' AWS account. And these are all typically 100 level courses. So just know that there's free courses out here. And by the way, if I click on this is an introduction to S3, by the way, if you haven't touched S3. I click on Start Lab. It's going to ask me to prove I'm not a robot, which apparently I can do with a checkbox. This is what humanity has been reduced to. Am I nothing more than a checkbox to you? Anyway, what's going to happen is it's going to provision its own AWS lab, and then it's going to say, it's going to pop up a button that says Open Console as soon as it's done provisioning. And then all I have to do is that I will be in a dedicated AWS account that's going to be alive for as long as this timer is not 0. And that can literally come in here, create a bucket, upload an object to the bucket, make the object public, test an activity. I can do all of these lab instructions in that account, not spend a dime in my own personal account. If I also just like, well, I don't really want to deal with having to open my own AWS account, you can also just, by the way, come out here and buy a membership with, you can either buy credits or buy a membership with Quick Labs, and you can run all the labs that we just saw in that catalog. And by the way, some of the labs out here for AWS are just as sophisticated as some of the 300 level labs. Like there was one out here on DynamoDB the other day. Oh, my spelling. Anyway, DynamoDB, and it was like how to build a serverless web app, like part 1, part 2, part 3, using DynamoDB and API gateway and da-da-da-da. You know, that'll cost you $3 to run those 3 labs, part 1, 2, and 3 right here. So keep this in your back pocket. This is like the 3rd URL. If you don't want to open your own AWS account and mess with all that, but you want some experience with S3 or some experience with EC2 and some experience with, you know, auto scaling as an example, you can usually either find a free lab or pay a few bucks and get access to a really high quality lab here. Okay. Plus you got support here, so you can go pester somebody if things don't go right. Questions about step 3?
Mike, assuming that all the Quick Labs are all SSA SAACO3 version? They're
They're
all
not-
up to current version?
Well, that's not. They're actually. This is more like task oriented. And so since AWS keeps updating their platform, it's stayed up to C03 version. There are no tasks that are in C02 that aren't, in a sense, still applicable because the platform has evolved. So you don't have to worry about these being out of date. They're all up to date.
Okay, thanks.
The only thing that you sometimes run into is that you'll have an instruction and it'll say the next button and it'll show it in orange, and your button will be blue, and instead of being on the lower left, it'll be on the lower right hand side. AWS is always changing the console, so sometimes you have to, like, every once in a while, you have to interpret the spirit of the instructions. Oh, there's a finish button, and it's black, but the one I have is orange, and it's over on the right hand side instead of the left, and you're just like, oh, well, they mean for me to finish, so I'll just hit finish. So sometimes there's a small measure of interpretation that happens. Okay. So if step 1 is to get the exam guide so you can get familiar with the exam, step 2 is to get the ramp up guide so you can have a step-by-step expertise study. Step 3 is use the things in the ramp up guide that you're not strong on to do labs in, right? So do step 3, get some labs. Step 4 is the final one and the one that we typically spend most of the time taking a look at. But step 4 is your final hurdle to know whether or not you're even ready to take the exam or not. So let's take a look at that. So this is where we're going to basically look at practice exams or study exams. Now, I want to be upfront. Neither AWS, WebAge, or anybody has a relationship with Tutorials Dojo. We just like these people because they do good work. So we unfortunately don't get any kickbacks from recommending this website. Kickbacks. Well, that makes it sound illegal, doesn't it? So I guess the recommendation here is that out here for about $12 if it's on sale, $15 if it's not. This gentleman, John Bonzo, who's also on Udemy, by the way, but I got to tell you, I would get it here instead of Udemy, even though there's less annoying pop-ups on Udemy. He has a Solutions Architect Associate exam set, practice exam set here, right there. Now, I'm already logged in, so it should like not necessarily give me the price, but they're about $15. When he ran his Friday sale, it was like $9.99 or $11.99 or something like that. So what's going to happen is that if we want you to go to Tutorials Dojo, and I'm going to paste this in the chat so you can just go straight there without having to navigate. Step 4 is to grab practice exams that are either exactly these or ones that you feel are very similar in match, although I got to tell you, we haven't seen those yet. And what you're going to do is if you buy John's exams, you're going to only do the review mode exams, not the timed, not the section based, although you can do the section based later if you know there's a section in your weekend, not the topic based, although you can do the topic based later. But you're definitely not going to do the timed or the final test. Why? Because it's not going to teach you anything. You're actually going to take the exam as if it's for real. And that's not why we're here. I want you to get practice taking the exam because I want you to walk in there and feel comfortable and confident. The only way to do that is for you to answer a question and then get the immediate answer. Answer a question, get the immediate answer. If you take time mode, or if you take the final test, it's not going to do that. It's not going to teach you anything. These aren't really practice exams. They're study exams. They're going to teach you how to take the exam. And remember, you've got 2 minutes a question. So at first, you're not going to do 2 minutes a question because you're going to be learning what these questions have to teach you. But eventually, like running a marathon, you start out with a 1K, you get your 5K, get your 10K, and then you're off, right? And that's how you're going to do it. So let's pick one of these so I can show you exactly what I'm talking about. I don't care which set you do, by the way, but you're going to do 2, possibly 3 of these sets. You're going to study them as if they are the way forward, because they are actually. So let's choose 4. Let's make that full screen. Okay, so here's how this works with the review mode. And this is set 4. Again, you're going to pick 2 of these and you're going to do one of them again and again and again until you get 90% plus, and then another again and again and again until you get 90% plus. And if you haven't touched AWS in production, you're going to do a third again and again and again. And I don't care whether it's 1, 5, 4, 3, 2, doesn't matter, but you're going to do one and do it over and over again. Now you might say, well, Michael, isn't that like, am I not just memorizing the answer at that point in time? kinda, I mean, you might think that, but I'm gonna show you why this is not really the case. So let's go to, let's just take a look at question 1, right? Question 1 says, well, we got a large multinational investment bank, so they got a web app, and they need 4 EC2 instances to run to ensure it can cater to its users across the globe. You're instructed to ensure the resiliency, basically, and fault tolerance of this system. What's the best option, right? So what's happening here is that when I first came through and showed this to another group, they all kind of like said, well, we think B is the answer, right? We're doing an auto-scaling group with 2 instances in each of 2 availability zones behind an application load balancer. But as you can see, that wasn't the right answer. And the reason it wasn't the right answer was that they wanted to be able to suffer the loss of 1 availability zone because that's AWS best practice. Within a region, assume that 1 of your availability zones is going to fail at any given time. So in this particular case, John then explains why that's not the right answer, why this is the right answer. And he goes through and tells you why the other answers are wrong. He tells you exactly why. So this is what we're looking for, is that you want practice exams that are going to give you the right answer and tell you why the other answers are wrong. And then they're going to have documentation as to where they got the answer from. So this is what you want. And by the way, he also has cheat sheets. If you keep missing answers on auto scaling, by the way, you can dive into those. He does have his own study guide, which I've already had several conversations with him about. Like, it's not that great, but opinions vary. So take a look at it if you're interested. But I'd probably just stick with the ramp up guide. John does run on Udemy, by the way. So you can also get his stuff there. But again, I'd probably get it here. I think you get longer durations, more updates, more time, that kind of thing. But this is what you want. So this is what we're going to spend the rest of the time doing for about the next hour, is that we're going to actually spend some time practicing the analysis of these questions, because step 4 is to really do these practice exams until you can get 90% on 2 or 3 of them. Once you can get 90% on 2 of these practice mode exams, meaning you can run through the whole thing, answer all 65 questions within, whatever time frame you deem appropriate, and you can get a 90% plus, you're ready. You can do that twice on 2 of these sets, you're ready to take the exam. That's your litmus test. If you cannot do that, your probability of passing the exam is relatively low. Questions for step 4?
So like when we are paying this $14 or $15, so is it per month, or is this one-time payment and we have access to this?
One-time payment, access for 3 years, updated access for 3 years.
Okay.
So this will last you until you decide to recertify 3 years from now, because that's how long the certification lasts.
Okay.
Yeah.
And sorry, one more thing. So when we go into these sets, so do these sets change, or like behind the scene, the questions change, or they remain the same? So like,
It's the same pool of questions for each set. Sometimes he'll change the order and the answers, will change, but it's the same pool, because once you've purchased the product, you have the same set of what they call forms. So set 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. It's all the same pool of questions in each of those particular sets. They just randomize them.
okay. And how many sets we had total? I forgot that when we started.
I believe it's 6. It might be 5. It's either 5 or 6.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So
Thanks.
I once had an interesting conversation with the head of training and certification at AWS. I said, are you worried about, people taking it? And she said to me, never forget this. She said, if someone goes out there, because remember there's 65 questions in a set. Let's say you got 6 sets. She said, if someone goes out there and remembers and memorizes 400 questions, they've learned something about AWS. They can pass the associate's exam. You know what I mean? And so remember, while I am not asking you to memorize these, I want you to actually study them. Just know that if the worst case scenario, you're like, I know the answer to that because I memorized it from last time. But let's be clear about what we're talking about. If you memorized that, if you're in this design pattern where you need to maintain 4 EC2 instances and you need to spread that out across 3 availability zones in order to meet business continuity minimums from an AWS best practice perspective, you memorized a piece of information about AWS. So, that's what her point to the whole thing was that while I'm not an advocate of you memorizing this way, you still learn something about AWS. So it's good.
Yeah, and I think that definitely makes sense because AWS is, you literally say, is a design pattern for architecting solutions. So it makes sense.
Hey, Michael.
Yes, Brian.
Hey, I joined about a half hour, 35 minutes late. So I'm trying to follow along, just kind of catch up. So step 1, exam guide, ramp up guide, do the labs through that AWS well architected. Then they got the dojo that you're going through now. Give the links to the exam guide and the ramp up guide.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to step back through it, and then we're going to go through some questions. Does that work?
That's perfect.
Yeah, because I know
Yep,
some people
cool.
joined late, so I'm going to make sure everybody knows that. All right. So
Okay.
we're going to rehash it, not just for requests, but the timing was perfect. Is that step 1 is that I want you to get the exam guide, which, where did I stick that thing? Here it is. Is that step 1, I want you to get the exam guide. So that's step 1 right here is step 1 exam guide. That's what you need first. So that's the first step. Step 2 is I want you to get a ramp up guide. And in this case, it's going to be the architect ramp up guide. Remember, this ramp up guide covers both pro and it covers professional. I only need you to do the associates. Sorry, did I say pro and professional? It covers associates and professional. So I only need you to do the associates. Don't worry about the professional stuff. The minute it says exam prep for associates, stop and switch to step 3 at that point in time. Okay. Now, step 3 had several URLs involved in it, right? And step 3 was about getting some hands-on experience. And this is really derived from the things that you felt that you weren't strong on from a step 2 perspective. Like if you, like we're looking at S3 and you're like, I don't really understand S3. Like you say object storage and I don't really know what that means. This is what step 3 is about, is that getting that hands-on experience. And that actually had 2 URLs plus a third that I kind of threw in there, just so people could have it, which was these 3 right here. And then step 4 was about getting tutorial JoJo experience in particular with this, like these practice exams, particularly the review mode exams. So 2 to 3 review mode exams at 90% pass, right? And that was all here at Tutorials Dojo. So, and this is obviously the SAA ones. Okay. Hopefully that's pretty straightforward and simple. By the way, this works for every exam. I will tell you that there's less hands-on workshops for this, like the machine learning specialty exams and stuff like that, but there are actually still very cool workshops for SageMaker and all that stuff. If you're doing machine learning, cool stuff for Redshift and Glue for data analytics. The only one, if you decide to go after the SAP on AWS certification, 1, and you didn't hear this from me, you might want to do that sooner rather than later. 2, there's not a lot of great resources for that. So, I don't have a good answer for the SAP one. Okay. Any questions about the steps? Everyone should have the links. By the way, there's 3 dots in your Zoom chat if you're using the actual client that'll allow you to save the chat to your local disk if you want to. But you can also just copy all the links that I just sent you. Anything else before we move on to a fun Jeopardy style game where we analyze questions and you get to answer them? Okay. Ask me at any time if something pops in your head. Meanwhile, let's dive into this. Oh, go ahead. Oh, sorry. I think I heard an echo. Must have been me echoing in my own head. Okay. So here's what we're going to do now. Now we're going to go through some questions, and I'm going to do some analysis for the first few questions, and then we're going to just switch into just pure, you get to answer. Okay. And we typically do this for about 45 minutes to an hour. Everyone's brains start melting after an hour. So I usually just check in and see how people are doing at that point in time. But this is what we do, is we're going to do this. And so when I ask for answers, please don't say them verbally. If you don't mind, please put A, B, C, or D, or E if there's 5, right? Just to make it easy. Okay. But let's take a look at this question first, right? Because these are the ones that we use for step 4. Okay, so we've got a compliance rule in our company that audits every Windows and Linux EC2 instance. By the way, if I say EC2 instances, what am I talking about in the industry? What kind of like object am I talking about?
Elastic compute.
A server.
You're talking about a server, right? You're talking about a virtual machine.
Sure.
Yes, it's definitely elastic compute, so that's accurate. But it's a virtual machine. That's all it is, just a virtual server. All right, so we're going to audit these boxes to view any performance issues. Notice I got Linux and Windows on there. They have more than 100 EC2 instances running in production, and each must have a logging function that collects various details regarding that instance. The sysops team is going to review these logs and analyze their contents using various AWS analytics tools, and the result will have to be retained in an S3 bucket. Now, first of all, without even looking at the answer, one, we're definitely gathering logs. We're gathering it about EC2 instances. We're doing it across a bunch of heterogeneous systems, so it's not just pure Linux, it's not just pure Windows, right? And it's not just security information, it's also performance information, right? So it's a little bit of everything, which is pretty standard, actually. And they want to export these logs out, and they want to put them somewhere, in this case, an S3 bucket, where various tools can get to them. So in this scenario, what is the most efficient way to collect and analyze logs from these EC2 instances? And they want the lowest operational overhead. What's the easiest way to do it? Because I got to tell you, most enterprises already solve this problem. They have their own tools for gathering performance information about operating systems, right? But let's assume we're greenfield here because we got a new compliance rule in our new company, right? And so then the question becomes, what do I need in order to gather those logs, right? Can I, for example, A, use the systems manager agent in each instance, which will automatically collect and push the CloudWatch logs, and then analyze the log data with CloudWatch Log Insights? Could do that. Do I install the SDK and write a custom daemon script that would collect and push the logs periodically? By the way, that's the old way of doing it. That's the way we used to do it. Do I install an inspector agent to do that? Same thing. Or do I install the unified CloudWatch agents in each instance, which will push the logs? What do I do here? Now, this is a typical question. I've got requirements. I've got qualifiers on the requirements because I have to do it in the most efficient way, which, by the way, is a very loose word. You won't find that on the exam. Because remember, these aren't exam dumps. And I don't even think they're allowed to use efficient. Cost effective, operationally efficient, most resilient. You'll see words like that, but you won't see like just blanket like most efficient typically. If you do, it might be an older exam, but C03 is updated, right? And then they want it with minimal effort, which means minimal operational overhead. So again, you're not going to see that little vague little weasel word either. You're going to see things like minimal operational overhead. Now, I got to tell you, I can eliminate 2 of these right off the bat. Does anyone know which 2 I can eliminate?
The 2 in the middle.
Yeah, 2 and 3, right? Because this is the old way of doing it, which does give you a lot of control, by the way, and you don't have to run an agent. But that's going to be a decent amount more operational overhead than just using some pre-compiled piece of software. And then this is not what this is for. What's Amazon Inspector for, by the way? Does anyone know?
I've not heard of it.
Well, let me ask you this. Is it an operations tool or a security tool? Well, hold on. I know what you're going to say. Wait, doesn't operations do security? Yes, you're right. You are right. I'm right there with you, right? Inspector's more of a security tool, though, right? It scans for vulnerabilities at the network and the host level, right? And that's what it does. Doesn't mean operations doesn't participate in that, but it's primarily a security tool. So 2 and 3 are out. Now we're left with what looks to be like the same thing, but do I choose the systems manager agent or do I choose the unified CloudWatch logs agent?
Yeah, what's the difference? What if I don't know the difference of those 2 things?
Well, and that's where our logical like ability to like figure it out, the methodology breaks down. Because we now know that there's something that, for example, we probably don't know about one of these 2 things. Because one of them is real, one of them isn't. One of them does that meets the requirements, and one of them doesn't. But you see that like you were able to analyze down to a certain point, and now you're like, I don't actually have that last piece of information. So now I have to guess. But at least we got us down to 50-50, right? better chances than, you know, one out of 4, right? Now, the other thing is that this says unified CloudWatch logs agent, and this says the systems manager agent. Now, both of these are real, and I'm not going to give you the answer. I'm just going to say, well, let's just, you know, this is the CloudWatch logs agent, so that sounds like maybe that might be the right one. But let me ask y'all, if you were to take a guess, would you go with A or B? I'm sorry, A or D?
I would say D.
I say D too, because systems manager seems like an overkill for this.
And doesn't it seem like it's another service like that we're talking about, right? Well, here you go. Watch this. You're right. Right? In this particular case. Now, what will throw you off a little bit, by the way, just so we can scroll down and see this, is that although SSM is a valid solution, so the systems manager agent, right, will actually do what we're asking it to do, it is overkill. It's more than what you need, which someone pointed out, right? One of you pointed out, you said it seems like that's more than what we actually need in this particular case. But just so you know, technically you can use the SSM agent to gather logs, right? But in this case, because it's said with minimal effort and it meant minimal operational overhead, and because this is overkill, this now makes this the right answer because all they asked you for was logs. They didn't ask you for systems management. So remember that AWS is going to want you to meet the requirements and not go overboard, because overboard typically means more cost. Because remember, everything in AWS typically has a billing and a security implication. So by adding more, you're going to be paying more in some cases, not all cases, in some cases. Okay. So that minimalistic mindset of like, I'm going to give you exactly what you're asking for, maybe just a step above, but not a lot above, is what they're looking for. Did that whole like methodology make sense? Anyone not really grok that as far as how we approached it? Hell, the word grok may not make any sense. That's from a Robert Heinlein novel, Stranger in a Strange Land. Does anyone not understand that? I've spent way too much time recently with a bunch of sci-fi geeks, or maybe not enough time. Anyway, moving on. By the way, this is now going to tell you, by the way, like logs and metrics. It's going to tell you what it does. You don't want to just answer this and move on. You want to study this. Did you actually know, like, for example, the unified agent provides better performance, right? Do you know there's a CloudWatch metrics agent, an old one, and then there's a CloudWatch logs agent, and then there's a unified agent for CloudWatch that'll do both? Did you know that, right? Like, you don't want to just skip it and move on. Hey, I got that, polish and move on. You want to make sure that you understand what's here. And then did you know that CloudWatch Log Insights could actually read those logs? I mean, those were our two best answers just based on the first sentence. But you don't want to take that for granted, because there might be a question later on in your exam about CloudWatch Logs Insights. And so by learning what that actually is, that might help you with a later question. SDKs don't make sense because those are software development kits. SSM agent, as we already said, was overkill, right? The inspector agent, because that's not what that's for, right? By the way, if you want answers from the original AWS documentation, it's right here. Oh, look at that. John has a little video on CloudWatch in case you keep missing questions on CloudWatch. You need to dive in. I would not look at the documentation or anything beneath it unless you, one, need further clarity of the answer, or two, you keep missing questions about that service. If you keep missing questions on CloudWatch, instead of just, rubbing your face against the proverbial cheese grater of I don't know, go look at an overview and then continue to take the reviews. You could stop the review mode exam at any time. It is not timed. We could do this question and come back tomorrow and do the rest of the questions. So just know that it's going to save your state from where you're at, so you don't have to finish it all in one fell swoop. You got 15 minutes to study, grab a question. You got 30 minutes, grab 2 or 3 or 4, whatever speed you're operating at. But don't feel like you got to have a whole 90 minutes to sit down and crank through 65 questions. You're going to do this a little bit at a time. Okay. All right, let's do another one. So I'll do like maybe 2 more analysis, and then we're going to just roll right into answering. All right, we got an ASG and auto-scaling group, which is configured to launch not new now, T2 micro EC2 instances when there's a significant load increase on the application that's part of that auto-scaling group. So to cope with demand, you now have to replace those T2 micros, which, by the way, those are really tiny to begin with T2 2x larges, right? How would you implement the change? So this question is asking you, do you understand the process for updating the size of a virtual machine of an EC2 instance inside of an autoscaling group? So change it manually, change the instance type in the current launch configuration, create another autoscaling group and attach the new instance type, and then create a new launch configuration with the new instance type and update the autoscaling group. So I'm going to open the floor. A, B, C, or D?
So can we do process elimination again?
Absolutely. So first of all, do you think that manually is ever going to be the answer with AWS?
Probably not.
Nope.
Nope. Unless that is literally the only answer. AWS is never going to recommend, I say never, that's a strong statement, is rarely, if ever, I haven't seen it. I'm going to be frank about it. I have never seen it. They've never recommended manual, and they don't recommend third parties unless the third party is in their marketplace. So if it's in their marketplace, by the way, it's a valid third party. But they're not going to say, hey, you know what, instead of using CloudFormation, you should use Terraform. Now, we all know that Terraform is better. Oh, God. Am I going to get fired for that? I'm just kidding. We all know that Terraform's better, right? But, you know, CloudFormation is the tool, right? The native tool, and that's the one they're going to test you on. You're not going to find third-party tools here. So manual is off the table. What about this kind of phrasing? Just change the instance type in the current launch configuration. Could it be that simple? We just change the instance type in the current launch configuration. Would that update then what it's going to use?
Sounds too good to be true.
I mean,
Sounds like it.
Sounds like it. I mean, the EC2 instance is actually, definition is contained in the launch configuration, right? So that sounds like that could be valid, right? What about creating another autoscaling group? What's the problem with that?
It's inefficient. You already have one.
You already have one. Why do I need to create another one? And don't get me wrong, if I'm doing blue-green A/B testing or some variation thereof, and I need to launch a whole new set of infrastructure, I'll do that. But that's not what the question's asking. And plus, that's a professional level question. It's saying, I just need to change the type. Do I really need to create a whole new autoscaling group just to change the type? I don't think so. So A and C automatically come off. So now we're left with B and D. And this is literally just a pure test of, do you know how this works? Right? And that's it. Now, I'm going to go, most of you, I think, put B. Yeah, I see a bunch of B's there. So let's go with B, right? And here's the challenge. Now you know, right? You can't, the launch configuration gets versioned and then associated with the autoscaling group. So in order for you to update it, you have to create a new version so it gets updated with the autoscaling group, right? And it has to be reassociated. Because the autoscaling group is going to stick with its version because it doesn't want to wreck anything. So it's going to force you to intentionally create a new launch configuration, which means you get a new version of your existing configuration and attach it to the autoscaling group. So now subsequent instances are now going to be using that new size. And that's just you just having to know how that works. Now, if you do a lab on this, you're going to know instantly how this works, because if you have to change anything in there, it's going to force you to create a new version of the launch configuration. Notice the very first sentence right there under incorrect. You can't modify a launch configuration after you've created it and associated it, right? So you can create a clone, a new version, a new copy, but you can't modify it once you've cemented it.
Also, Michael, quick question. I believe, is it a general design principle with AWS that whenever you can create a new version, try to create a new version rather than alter the existing one? Because is that true, or am I
It's
correct?
increasingly true, but like a lot of things don't support versioning, which is frustrating. But like if it's a CloudFormation template, you know, obviously you're going to version that outside of AWS, right? But CDK outside of AWS. So a lot of it ends up being done outside of AWS. The autoscaling group has been like this for quite a while, and it's just always had versions. But in general, when you define something that they're going to manage for you, they're going to put versions around it. Because if they're managing it for you, they want you to be very intentional about messing with the configuration of that thing that they're managing for you. Since they do auto scaling based on parameters you set, they're going to force you to do a version to make sure that you are intentional about updating it. Because otherwise, what if someone comes in and just accidentally changes it and it wrecks the application? So in general, though, what you're saying, Jatinder, is true, is that they want you to do versioning on almost everything you can.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anything else here? Can't directly change the instance type of your AC2 instance. No, can't do it. Nope. And then can't change launch configuration. So I think we covered all that. So I think we're good. All right, let's do one more and then we'll go free. Actually, won't do that one since I just did that one. Let's see. Let's go look at the top here. 7. All right. Tech startup got a Series A round of funding to build their mobile Forex trading system. Awesome. You're hired to set up their cloud architecture in AWS and implement a highly available fault-tolerant system. Okay, so we already got some resiliency requirements. For their database, they're using DynamoDB, and for authentication, they've chosen to use Cognito. So we've already had some service declaration here. Since the mobile app contains confidential financial transactions, there's a requirement to add a second authentication method that doesn't rely solely on username and password. Okay. So highly available, fault tolerant, but we're talking about a security requirement, and we're using DynamoDB as our back end, but Cognito is our primary auth tool. And Cognito, by the way, is purpose-built for web and mobile apps for authentication and authorization. So, and it integrates with IAM, so it's nice. So no issue there, right? So let's take a look at it. So if we were going to implement, if we want to develop a custom application that integrates with Cognito, first of all, what did I say about third parties or custom work? A is out. They're not going to recommend that in general. There are very rare use cases where you see it, but in general, no, right? Integrate Cognito with SNS mobile push to allow additional authentication via SMS. I mean, that sounds nice, but just so you know, Cognito already has a mobile sync, so why would they need SNS mobile push? No, yeah, that doesn't make any sense actually. And then add a new IAM policy to a user pool in Cognito. So the way Cognito works is that, first of all, policies go against IAM, not Cognito. So while policies are real, you can't really attach them to Cognito. You can do roles inside of Cognito, but you can't attach policies. You can't attach IAM policies to anything but IAM. That's what they're there for. So C is kind of out as a result as well, because IAM policies are only for IAM objects, and Cognito is a separate service. So out. Add multi-factor authentication to a user pool in Cognito to protect the identity of your users. That can make sense. So unless there's some flaw in how I analyzed B, which is the only one I could see that maybe I have forgotten something about how that integration works, it seems like D would actually be the right answer. And most of you thought that as well, because that's what you put. So multi-factor authentication, right? You can also use SMS text messages. This one must be an older question because it doesn't list why these are wrong, but I just walked through it. This is only for IAM. These two don't need each other, so that doesn't make any sense. And then we're not going to recommend a custom app for this when we already have AWS tools that will do it. Okay. Questions about that? This is super rare, by the way. I don't know that I've ever remember seeing this before where there's not a right, wrong, and whatever here. So, must be an older question. Okay. So now we're going to shift over and you're going to answer, and I'm going to give you, a minute or two to do it. Okay. So a lot of D's. I see a lot of D's. I see a couple, 2 B's, an A, but I see a lot of D's. Okay. So let's go with D. Let's see what the consensus is. All right. Oh, cost effective. Interesting. All right. So I didn't emphasize the requirement there, which was given these conditions, which of the following options would be the most cost-effective solution for your client storage needs. So I know that it seems like you all understood that Glacier is really where most of the files should go. That seems super clear, right? You understood that Glacier is the cheapest and cold. So for example, if a terabyte of storage in S3 standard costs you $24 a month, it'll cost you $1 in Deep Archive, Glacier Deep Archive, right? So, 1/24th, 1/23rd of the cost, right? So you all seem to get that as far as like, it needs to be in Glacier. I think where people got caught is that one, the name of some of these things needs to be updated, but it says one zone in frequent access, right? Versus just standard S3 in frequent access. So the T Dojo Finance, the cheapest one is actually the one zone versus the just standard and frequent access. So that is actually the cheapest. Now, I will tell you something that has changed inside of the S3 storage classes, that if I do not take a minute to just explain this for half a second, you're going to be really confused when you get to the exam, because you're not going to see Glacier on the exam. Does anyone know why? Does anyone know why you're not going to see just Glacier on the exam anymore? Let me show you. Let me pull up a little slide deck for you that's going to explain this, hopefully, very clearly.
We have further classes in Glacier as well now.
That's right. There are further classes inside of Glacier now. And one of them, by the way, has a millisecond instant retrieval time. So it's really thrown people for a loop when it comes down to infrequent access versus infrequent access. So by the way, you guys are getting exposed. You're getting a free class on storage from the actual sysops class. Let me pull this up really quick. Oh, wow. Those speaker notes really dominate. Let's get this out of there. Okay. All right. So as you can see here, right, S3 is now divided into a bunch of storage classes. And intelligent tiering, by the way, I don't even really consider it a storage class. That's where you're basically saying, I don't know my access patterns, so AWS just managed this for me, right? So it is technically a tier, but just know that it's the weirdest of all of them. So that being said, here are the differences. Just now in our answers, we saw Glacier has an answer. And here's the problem, is that Glacier is now this. So that's now Glacier. Actually, let me narrow that down a little bit. When they say Glacier, you're not going to see Glacier anymore. You're going to see Glacier Flexible Retrieval. You're going to see Deep Archive. But here's the problem, is that these will all provide milliseconds of response time. But this is now cheaper. This is now cheaper. This is now cheaper than infrequent access one zone. Does that make sense to everybody? So out of the answers that were there, it was still good. Just like Glacier's in general is cheaper than one zone, so it was better to stick everything to Glacier. But just know you're not going to see that on the exam. You're going to see flexible retrieval, which refers to old Glacier, and you're going to see Glacier Deep Archive, which has always been called Glacier Deep Archive. And now you're also going to occasionally see Glacier Instant Retrieval, right? But you shouldn't see just S3 Glacier anymore on the exam, because there's now 3 very distinctive flavors. And you might say, well, Michael, when do you use infrequent access versus instant retrieval? And I'll give you this math. If you're going to retrieve a file out of deep cold storage more than like a few times a quarter, you're going to pay more for Glacier instant retrieval than you will if you had just left it in infrequent access. Does everyone follow me? If you've got a bunch of infrequently accessed files and they're getting access like once a day or a few times a month, leave them in infrequent access. If you got files that are going to be accessed maybe like a few times a quarter, stick them in Glacier instant retrieval. Because instant retrieval, by the way, is going to charge you 0.03 cents, if I remember correctly, per gigabyte that you flash retrieve, right? So just know that that's the distinction. So you're going to see that on the exam. If you see that, if you see one zone and instant retrieval on the same page, remember instant retrieval is cheaper if you're only accessing those files a few times a quarter. If you're accessing those files every day or a couple times a month, infrequent access is going to be the answer. Does that not make sense to anybody?
Unless you need more resiliency, right?
Well, remember, standard IA is actually, you know, and just so you know, the 99, the availability and the durability. Have you looked at those documents? The numbers don't go down. I don't understand why. I thought it was a typo, and they told me it wasn't. But it's down to one zone, right? But it's still 11 nines of durability, and it's still 99.95 of availability. So I don't know what to think about that, because it's cheaper. But I think what they're saying is that it's cheaper because Amazon's not going to try and recover it, not because the infrastructure is less redundant. Does that make sense?
Yep.
It's weird. Yeah, so standard IA, by the way, is still highly resilient and recoverable. All right, just want to make sure that distinction was clear. Let's go back to our regularly scheduled programming. All right, let's go to the next question. Got about 30 more minutes, and I'll let you go. We're there. Let's see. What's our tally here? 2 C's, 3 B's, 3 C's, 4 C's, 5 C's, 6 C's, 6 C's. Okay. All right. So before I answer this, right, because it looks like C is the top answer right here, the most frequently chosen. Let me ask you a few questions. First of all, someone tell me what DynamoDB is.
Cloud
It's a
database.
document data store.
Yeah, so it's a NoSQL, right? Pretty much JSON attribute key value store. That's all it is, right? Can DynamoDB support standard SQL queries?
No.
Actually, it can. So it's not going to do complex queries, but it'll do standard SQL queries. It has a transact SQL that will work against it, actually. So it's kind of cheap that they throw this in here as a distractor, because it will actually support SQ3 query. It will actually support SQL queries, but it's not its native function. So a little weird, right? Now, MySQL, I mean, that's the staple. We know that one will support SQL queries, right? All right, so then tell me, and I'm assuming since it says MySQL RDS, you know that RDS is a relational database service. So then what's Athena? Someone tell me what Athena is.
It's a utility that allows you to query using SQL or T-SQL, Transact SQL.
Fair enough. Does it have servers, Boris?
It does not.
It does not. Serverless, right? And it uses Presto and Hive under the covers, right? So it's really like a Presto system, really. In memory, right? Serverless, like it's more like a PaaS, right? So, and then last we have, let's load this puppy up into Redshift, right? Which, by the way, that's not even how you load it into Redshift. By the way, you can just load things from S3 directly into Redshift, so that looks weird. D does to begin with. But here's the thing: what was the qualifier on the requirements? What did they ask us for, as far as like what was the challenge question? Cost effective. Yeah, standard SQL. Cost effective, easiest way. So automatically, are we looking at SaaS, PaaS, or infrastructure as a service if we're doing that?
I would think SaaS.
I would think SaaS, right? DynamoDB, by the way, is pretty sassy. I'm sorry, that's horrible. It's pretty SaaS like, right? RDS is more of a PaaS, right? Athena is definitely sassy. I can't stop saying it now that I've said it. I'm sorry. And Redshift is more of a PaaS because it does operate on the concept of clusters. So even though it is SaaS-esque, it's more of a PaaS because you still have the concept of nodes and finite capacity. It's not serverless, right? So most of you put C, and so let's see, because maybe we're just all making it up. Maybe Athena is not the easiest and the most cost-effective way, but the answer is actually it is. And the reason is that DynamoDB could be scaled down, but it's not natively built for analytics. DynamoDB is built for transactional. So right tool for the right job, mechanical sympathy, right? Don't use your screwdriver as a hammer. Don't use your hammer as a screwdriver. Well, unless you're just a genius, and then you just do whatever, and nobody's watching. But DynamoDB was designed for transactionals, not for analytics. MySQL RDS, that could work, but that's not going to be cost effective, nor is it going to be the easiest way, because standing up a database is fun for us quirky nerds who like doing it, but for the most part, most people are not going to be interested in that. Besides, remember this, AWS's primary value proposition is always about operational offloading. So while this exam is technical in nature, there is kind of this kind of like mindset bent, for the exam, because that's the advantage of using it, right? Athena is serverless, so it's pretty clean. It does support SQL. It's the lowest cost out of all the options, way cheaper than Redshift. Could be cheaper than DynamoDB. DynamoDB would be a close one, but DynamoDB is not built for that. And then MySQL RDS is also more of a transactional tool, but doesn't matter. It does support, and it has been run as a data warehouse prior to all these specialized tools coming out. So, but it's going to be the most expensive. So it's because of the cost effective and easiest ways that the other ones really aren't going to fit. Okay. Questions, disputes, soliloquies about anything I just said just now? Now, qualifier earlier, when I said that DynamoDB can run SQL, it can support very simple SQL instances. And I got to tell you, I don't know who's using that feature. Amazon doesn't do anything unless like 80% of its customers want it, but it still confuses me sometimes, the features that make it out into the wild, but I'm moving on. All right. Anyway, there's your Athena reference if you need it. Again, this one seems to be, what's going on with John? I haven't seen these questions do this. Anyway, the rest of the options are all correct because it's not necessarily a supported database to set up a CSV file. All right. Okay. So let's see what we got. D's, A's, 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 and A's. Okay. Okay. So let's say A is the proper answer. All right. So we got some EC2 instances inside of a VPC, mission critical. One of the EC2 instances powered down, which caused a problem. Probably could address that differently, but we'll move on. The management wants to get notified of any upcoming AWS events that may affect these EC2 instances. Okay. Now, all of these answers are the same. CloudWatch events, CloudWatch events, CloudWatch events, CloudWatch events, except one of them has it scheduled to run every 24 hours. The other one has it set for any status change. The other one has to check for any events that are related to EC2 instances, and this one has to check for any events that relate to EC2 instances. So the 24-hour one is going to be off just because time, right? Like, that's not helpful. I don't want to get notified once every 24 hours. I want to get noted the minute an event is sent by AWS out, right? This one then says, we're going to check the rule for any status change, set a target to a Lambda function that will send a notification and restart the instances. Well, first of all, I didn't ask to restart the instances, although that's cool that I can do that. And two, I don't need Lambda for that. Can I not just send it to SNS? Now, to restart the instances, I might need Lambda, but that's not what I asked for. So I don't think B's on the table either, right? So now we're left with these two, which are remarkably the same, except for what? Who can tell me the difference between the personal health dashboard and the service health dashboard? Because you all put A, and if I go and check it, what does it say? It says A is wrong, right? So
it sounded so plausible. Personal health dashboard just sounds so personal.
So the PHD, the personal health dashboard, which has a horrible acronym, is underneath Systems Manager, but also runs as its own service. The personal health dashboard takes any event that's being sent by the service health dashboard and tells you whether or not the outage is actually affecting your resources. So it's scoped to your account. It's a service inside of your account. So the personal health dashboard will say, hey, you know that outage that we're having in Virginia? Your 5 instances and this are being affected by it. So it really is a way to get personalized event information from AWS and like create custom rules. The service health dashboard is going to throw an error if anything happens to any customer across anything in AWS related to EC2. And you don't want that. You want something very personalized, right? You want it personalized for your account. So just know the personal health dashboard exists. It's inside. You can find it as a separate service, but it's also inside Systems Manager, and you can look at it there. And there's an outage. It's going to personalize it and tell you which resources you have that are going to be affected by the outage. Because just because they say all EC2 instances, they might actually be talking about one of the 12 data centers that makes up, US East 1A. And if you don't have any EC2 instances in that particular data center, they'll let you know that they're having an outage, but it's not affecting you. Make sense? Questions? If you scroll down here, by the way, it's going to tell you, I'm not telling you anything other than the Glacier incident retrieval thing. I'm not telling you anything they're not going to tell you, right? Is that we're going to use EventBridge. AWS Health is going to provide visibility into the availability of your AWS services and accounts, right? It's going to then, visualize it, let you see it, and then tell you why the other things are wrong, right? It doesn't show events related to specific instances on an individual accounts. This is why just the service health dashboard doesn't quite get you there. Send notifications. They don't want you to do this, right? And then yeah, service health dashboard here doesn't work either. Oh, and this is also using service health dashboard. But this 24-hour thing is the thing that also threw me. I don't want 24-hour event notification. I want real time. Okay. Yeah, I think we probably got 2 more in us. All right, here we go. It's 3:45. I'll check back at 3:47. Okay. Looks like we're there. Let's see, what do we got? I got a bunch of ADs, AB, AB, AE, AB, AE. Okay. So it seems like A is definitely, you're all centered on A, right? Like, okay, so because I need to implement an SSL solution and I need to request an SSL certificate from a third party. Where can I safely import the SSL certificate of our application, right? By the way, where does CloudFront get SSL certificates from? Does anyone know? So CloudFront will actually pull its certificates from the other locations that we're about to talk about. The certificate manager is one of the locations it can pull from. What about an S3 bucket configured with server-side encryption and a private bucket with versioning enabled? Why is that a great distractor? What kind of certificates are we talking about when we talk about the kind of like keys and encryption that we're talking about with C and D? Are we talking about encryption at rest or encryption in transit? When we talk about certificates, are we talking about encryption at rest or encryption in transit?
At rest. Transit.
Transit.
Yeah, when we talk about certificates, typically we're talking about encryption in transit, meaning web traffic for the most part, right? When we start talking about like, like asymmetric, symmetric keys that are, embedded in like a FIPS 140-2 device, and we're talking about encryption at rest typically, right? We're not talking about something that's going to be for in transit. So SSL TLS certificates 100% are in transit. So S3 is not really here for that purpose because both of these options, well, certainly the D is talking about at rest encryption. So it's off the table. Versioning, by the way, has nothing to do with encryption. So it comes off the table. Just duplicate copies of changed files. So we're left with A, B, and E as our options, which seem to be with the bulk of what everybody put was A and then either B or an E, right? Now, CloudFront has its own certificate from AWS, but you can also grab a certificate from any of the other 2 locations. But the other 2 locations are Certificate Manager and the IAM Certificate Store, which most people don't know about. It's been around for a while, but you can actually import certificates up there. Now, does that make it the right answer in this case? It should be, right? Because CloudFront's going to get its certificates from those other 2 locations anyway. But the IAM certificate store, by the way, is the old way of doing it. It's fallen out of favor instead of using ACM, which is the certificate manager. And by the way, the only way you can't manage the IAM certificates in the console, you have to use the API. So you're either writing your own Python scripts or using the AWS CLI to upload all the parts of the certificate up to the certificate store for IAM. And then you could then refer to it in some of your like load balancers. But yeah. So you probably won't see the certificate store on an exam after this version goes away, but it is still there, just like STS. It's a totally valid service. So, and people are still using it. Certificate manager, certificate store, ACM lets you do third parties, and then you can do third parties to the IAM certificate store as well. S3 is not used to host certificates. Plus, we're talking about customer provided key encryption and versioning. This is not going to help at all. This is not an appropriate place for us to be storing certs, right? And then CloudFront is that you can upload certificates to CloudFront, but mainly it sources it from other locations. You wouldn't be able to do anything with that certificate. It's not a source of like reuse and storage. So, yeah, nor could you assign it to EC2 or ELBs. Any questions about that one? You know what? My whole reasoning about, I don't know why I said that actually now that I'm looking at it. I realized that they were wanting to store the certificates here. Sorry, my whole thing about the at-rest didn't make any sense now that I'm looking at it. These are just not good places to store certificates. I apologize. That was just a flaw in my thinking. All right, let's do one more. All right, last one. We'll give it 2 minutes and then we'll call it a day. All right, let's see what we got here. All right, looks like predominantly A's. Let's just dive in, see what we got. Okay. So let's go back to the question here. Dealers use keys to automate their resource provisioning. They want to ensure proper compliance, so they want to automate the process of deactivating and deleting any keys that are older than 90 days. They want you to meet that requirement of automating that retirement and deletion of keys with the least amount of operational effort. So they don't want you to write anything involving Lambda if you can get away with doing it using any kind of other automated process, right? Now, that being said, Lambda is one of the easiest ways to write functions, so that's not necessarily wrong, but if you had to write a custom application or anything heavier, that's definitely going to be off the table. But out of the answers that we have here, the best way to track configuration changes in AWS is to use what service?
Config, apparently.
Config, apparently, right? Which is really misleading because you would think that config would be used to configure AWS, but it doesn't. AWS config has an awesomely misleading name because it should say AWS configuration tracker, which is not what it says. It just says AWS config. But all it does is track configuration changes. So it's constantly looking at state changes inside of AWS. And if you have a rule of compliance around that state changes, you can then attach that to a target, like a Lambda function or an event bridge rule or whatever, and then have it invoke and remediate, right? So config is going to be the answer. And notice that they're using an AWS config manage rule versus a custom rule. I don't think batch can actually be it says schedule a batch. There's no linkage there between batch and config, so that doesn't seem to make much of an answer. But the last one says use config manage rule to check if the user key has not been rotated, then create an event bridge rule for the non-compliant keys, and then define a target to invoke a custom Lambda function. So config will trigger event bridge to then call the Lambda function. In many cases, by the way, config can call the Lambda function directly. It just depends on what the rule has going on. But that's going to be the easiest way because config already has a rule defined for it. Config's designed for that purpose. The only thing you might run into a problem with is to invoke a custom Lambda function to deactivate and delete the keys. But frankly, there's probably a blueprint out there for it. So config's going to give you the detailed configuration view. Event bridge is basically an event bus service that's going to capture the event and then trigger an output like SNS or Lambda. So you'll see here how it's like AH key hitting config triggers event bridge, which then triggers an event function and then could also send a notification. All the details are there. Okay. Questions, comments?
Quick question, Michael. Are these questions from the actual AWS certification exam, or this is something that
They're
purposefully made?
approximations.
Okay.
They're approximations. So John
Okay.
works with AWS to make sure, because this is not an exam dump. And technically, you know, in the agreement that you sign, you can't use exam dumps if you get caught, blah, 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 you know, the whole deal. So this is not an exam dump because they AWS legal works with John to make sure he toes the line. John has a photographic memory. So the problem is that he could actually write the exact exam questions, every one that he's taken. What he does is he modifies it enough so that legal says, ah, that's okay, that's good, right? So it doesn't like cause any issues. He also uses older questions that he's modified that are no longer on the exam.
Okay. So like when we are getting the exam, so will the exams will be so confusing even if we have prepared for it, or we will get better? Like, because right now it looks like we are kind of not that great on what we are selecting or something.
Well, you should be remarkably uncomfortable and slightly defeated right now after watching us go through this. If you are not in that state, then you're probably ready to take the exam.
Oh,
so,
no, I'm in that state.
Yeah, any of you, all of you should be slightly like overwhelmed, defeated, and a little like, oh my God, you know, like, and some people even get irritated, which is totally fine. You should be uncomfortable because that's the whole reason you're going to do the practice exams at the end of everything, is that you're just at the start of a journey that you haven't trained for. So you're seeing basically what you're going to have to do in order to achieve the outcome, but you're at, you know, step 0 and this is step 50, right? So it's okay. You shouldn't feel like you're ready for this. You're not ready for this. That's why we just gave you 4 steps. So that's totally valid. But what I do want to tell you is that this is actually easily doable just by putting in that 8 weeks of study, right? At a couple of weeks. And some of you, by the way, will go faster. That's an average of about 5 hours a week over 8 weeks. Some people will go way faster, especially if you've been working in the technology industry for a while and you've got context and you can just attach it. And some of you will go slower, and that's okay, right? But right now, you should not feel like you are in any way, shape, or form ready. This was just to get you an idea of what you're kind of, in a sense, stepping up for. So, yeah. So just a rehash in case you're like, oh, I don't remember the steps, and Michael's gonna say them at the end of the video, so I can just skip to the end of the video and rehash them. Is that, remember, step 1 was to go get the AWS exam guide for the SAA exam for Solutions Architect Associate. Remember, we're on C03. Look at the exam guide, but particularly look at the domain tasks and list and make sure you understand every concept and service at a superficial level there. If you do not know what Direct Connect is, you don't know what Inspector is, you don't know what Guard Duty is, go at least get a one-liner definition of what those services are. That's step 1. Step 2 is to type in AWS Ramp-Up Guide and go to the Ramp-Up Guides, click on Architect, and do everything it says up there right up until it says AWS Exam Prep for Solutions Architect. That's step 2. That's all the digital trainings and the self-paced labs. Step 3 is use any of the 3 URLs, which is workshops.aws, the wellarchitectedlabs.com, or amazon.quicklabs.com, quick with a Q-W-I-K, right? Not Q-U-I-C, okay. And get some hands-on experience. That's step 3. So either create your own free account and run some workshops, or go to amazon.quicklabs.com and pay a few bucks to run labs in their controlled environment. That's step 3. Step 4 is that I want you to consider coming here to Tutorials Dojo, grabbing their Solutions Architect Associates exam set, and you're going to do just the review mode exams. And you're going to do 2 or 3 of them, but you're going to do them one at a time until you can get 90% on all the questions. Then you're going to study the next one to just one, second set, 90%, third set, 90%. If you can get 90% plus on 2 of the review mode sets, you're ready to take the exam. And so then at that point, what you're going to do is you're going to go to AWS certification. You're going to go to the top where it says schedule an exam. You're going to sign in using whatever email address either that you already have with Amazon. You can use your personal email address, or you can use your work email address. I recommend personal, just so you know. And you're going to sign in here, and you're going to click on exam registration once you get into this website. And by the way, you can create an account if you don't have one. And this has stuff like, your digital badges and all of your achieved certifications. And then your exam registration, which is the most important page. You're going to come over here and schedule SAA C03 with Pearson VUE, not with PSI. Why? Because PSI is going away. Once you get logged in, you can take it at a test center. You can take it at home. I highly recommend that you take it at a test center. I do, actually. Because if you take it at home, you can't have any monitors or anything on your desk. You can't wear a watch, and you will get no bathroom break, which may not matter at a 2-hour exam, but it's definitely going to matter at a 3-hour exam. Okay. Once you go through all this, by the way, which is going to ask you a bunch of intuitive questions, you just pick your exam time, show up 15 minutes early, make sure you have your documents. Do not use your work computer if it has any endpoint software on it to take these exams. If you take it at home, again, I just highly recommend just go take it at a testing center. If you can't do that, make sure you read every single piece of documentation they send you about the at-home version. Okay. And that's it. Step 1, exam guide. Step 2, ramp up guide. Step 3, get hands-on experience. Step 4, do the practice exams. Step 5, sign up for the exam. Okay.
So Michael, you mentioned we cannot have a monitor. What do you mean by that? Like,
sorry, you can't have 2 monitors.
Oh, so okay.
You have to clear your desk. You have to be able to take pictures of all 4 sides of your desk, including underneath it. You can't have anything on here except for monitor, keyboard, mouse, and your desktop if it's up there. And no watches. Nothing can be impersonal. If someone walks in the room, they might give you a warning, or they might just shut you down right there. So no one can walk in the room. If you got a pet running around with a jangling collar, they're going to interrupt you frequently to ask you what that sound is. Just take it at a testing center. I usually take it at home, but I'm also a veteran of it. But I just grab my laptop and run over to my see-through glass dining room table, pull it in the middle of the dining room, kick everybody out, and take my test on my little 17-inch laptop. That's my recommendation, is get isolated if you're going to take it at home. Ben Piper and Mr. Clinton are well known as far as the book that was just posted, Daniel. I would say you don't need that. Unless you're just feeling really like you need extra study prep and support, you could go that route. But frankly, with the material that you have, just in the stuff that I gave you with the ramp up guides and with the practice guides, it'll be pretty good. But if you want more, I mean, I haven't heard anything bad about their book. So, in fact, I think I was just looking at the table of contents recently, but I don't remember when. Cool.
I have that book, but mine is older version, CO2. So
yeah, so it'll be 80% relevant. One thing you need to know is that they added data ingestion into C03. So the new architecture, it does have data ingestion. So it has things like glue and Kinesis data fire hose in it, whereas those were not in scope before. So good. Well, unless there's any other questions, we're done actually. Because usually at this point, I can only usually get about an hour worth of study out of people. Just know that if you ever want another session like this, where we just do pure study exams, or you want more coaching, just let Victoria know, whoever your liaison is, and she will definitely put it on the radar. We can easily come back out and cover the material. You'll have the recording though, so if you want to review it, let me know. Also, if you want to email me because you have a question or whatnot, you can catch me at miaforay@amazon.com, or you can get me at michael.forrester at WebH Solutions. Just know that if you forget either of those, just email Victoria. She'll tell you where I'm at, where you can find me. Okay? Good spending time with y'all. Otherwise, that's it. We're done. I'm going to hang out here in case anyone has any lingering questions, but enjoy the rest of your weekend.